Welcome back, welcome back. We're taking a little sidestep now to do some political science, bit of analytical stuff here. We're going to delve into the murky world of public opinion and public opinion analysis. Now, obviously as politics students you will know that in the British or UK system there's a bit of an arm's length relationship between Parliament and the public because we have very strong political parties compared to other democracies like the USA, and people tend to vote as Sir Jacob said, for parties rather than people, but personalities can matter quite a lot. The person I have with me on my left today is Seb Wride from the organisation The Public First Polls, which is an opinion poll research organisation, and he's going to look at your attitudes, your public opinion attitudes, as a body compared with the general UK public and how the UK public is feeling about parties, leaders and issues right now. So for an upsum, hand you over and a big welcome please to Seb Wride.
Hi everyone. Thank you. So I'll start off by saying if you haven't filled in the poll, please do, because we will keep looking at these results after this is done, and we'll publish something on it as well and send it to everyone to have a look at this. We asked you a number of questions, both about how you're voting, about the issues you think matter the most, about how you respond to things like the US and international relations. And we've done this a few times now, and I think we always find that this group has a little bit of a higher representation of the smaller parties, the Liberal Democrats, the Green parties. But I think this time it was starker than I've ever seen it before. If we compare to March, this group that we did this conference with was a Lib Dem group, roughly. A little bit of Conservative, a little bit of Labour, but mainly a Lib Dem group. If I look at it now, it is overwhelmingly a Green Party group. About 35% of you who filled in so far, still time to change it if you're not on that side, but are in the Green Party camp here. The key issue for all of you, and here's one of the ways that you really align with the British public, the cost of living crisis and the state of the economy. These were the top issues, but you are split practically down the middle as to whether you would cut taxes and cut public spending or increase taxes and increase public spending, which I think shows the issue facing Rachel Reeves this week with the budget. And not only that, but the level of popularity that the Labour Party has. More than half of you, nearly 60% of you, said that the Labour Party was doing a bad job. They're 1 year in, and you're all saying they're doing a bad job, and they have a budget they're facing down where people don't really know what to do. That's the level of challenge they're facing. One of the final things I would say was interesting looking through your results compared to the public. We've been looking into what we're calling anti-politics, but it broadly reflects this view that politicians are in it for themselves, they don't understand people, they do things without sort of recourse to public opinion. This group was actually a bit more positive about politicians than I expected. I'm used to looking at the public where 80% of people will say politicians are just in it for themselves, whereas you guys were a little bit more okay with the idea. I mean, you're still majority saying politicians are in it for themselves, but only about 50%, not the sort of 85% that I'm used to seeing. So perhaps a little bit more confidence in the political system as it stands in this room, but nonetheless, over half of you are saying that if you were voting an election tomorrow, you would be picking the least bad option rather than an option that you really liked. So it's hard to sort of make it sound positive, but like that's where we're at on this at the moment.
Seb, would it be true to say that as the years are going by, that the long-term attachments to political parties, usually through class, are being eroded away? Because the political science studies by the universities are suggesting that. Is your work picking that up as well?
I mean, it's hard to see reform coming effectively out of nowhere and being at 30% in the polls and not think that there's some level of attachment to the mainstream parties that's disappeared, right? And we're seeing a similar, slightly smaller surge among the Green Party at the moment. Whether that reflects, like how that reflects the movement between voters to non-voting and non-voting to voting, and whether polls can even possibly reflect what's going to happen in maybe 3 years' time is a separate question. But I think the reality is we are moving to a complete multipolarity of parties right now. And if I look at the polls, and I've never seen them anything like this, where you're effectively Reform is top, and then you've got a 4-horse race for second place, and then you have electoral results like Caerphilly where Plaid wins, and it's like, well, this is clearly an entirely different political reality that we're living in now. How on earth can both mainstream parties and traditional parties build back the support they had? I'm not really sure at the moment.
I hate to corner you as a very objective pollster and great friend of our conference, but given that we're now into 5-party politics or 4-party politics, and the 2-party politics era seems to be effectively over, is it now time for PR, for the additional member system, for the alternative vote? Without wishing to give us your personal opinion.
I think that the difficulty you always have with talking about electoral systems, and I will dodge your question about my opinion and instead talk about the public opinion, which is to say that like a lot of people don't really understand exactly how that would manifest. And if you're asking questions about proportional representation, it sounds good, but then people don't really know what that means necessarily. Like, what would I actually have to vote for? Like, how do I, does this person still represent my local area? Those are the concerns people tend to have. I think if you phrase it in the way where it's probably most meaningful to people, it means greater representation for the party that you personally support, even if that party is a smaller party. A lot of people would be quite positive towards that. And I think just say, like, at the moment, the other thing to bear in mind as we move to having so many parties of sort of, plausibly going to be electorally significant in the next election, the other thing to bear in mind is the role that like tactical voting is going to play in the current setting we have. Like, we saw that with Plaid recently. In May next year, we're going to see this to the extreme. Like, how much do people rally to vote, not just against reform, but against Labour? It's going to be very, very difficult for pollsters to predict this, and I wouldn't be surprised if we see very variable predictions as to the outcomes of the next election.
Okay, thank you, Seb. Could take a question from the young man here. Could you turn the mic on, please? It's okay, yep, off you go. What's your name?
Harley, just respectfully, my question's to the SNP, but if anyone wants to ask them a question, please feel free to take my spot.
Do you want to come up or do you want to wait? Oh, okay, go on.
Oh, no, I don't have a question. I just have a question for the next guy.
Okay, right. Cam, do you want to ask a question about opinion polls? No? Okay. Anybody want to ask a question about opinion polls? Young person there. What's your name?
My name's Ethan. Good afternoon, Mr. Wride. Based on your data, what do you believe is the most overestimated issue in Westminster when compared to its real weight among voters? And what is the most underestimated?
Oh, that's so difficult. Thank you. It's a really great question. So let's think. The key issues that you see coming out top at the moment are economy and then increasingly immigration. And I think that does reflect the reality of where people are talking. You could argue that immigration isn't being discussed as much in Westminster, despite what you see in the media. What you see in terms of actual like policy maneuver is maybe not reflecting the extent to which that is the sentiment we see in the population. Then it's difficult to say the flip side of it. I think there are things which depend less upon public opinion just by how they've always run. So education policy, for example, it is a bit more challenging to find a really, really strong public opinion towards what we should do on education policy. Similar is true for climate change. People want to see action in some form or another. Most of the debate boils down to, is this going to cost me more? Is this going to cost me less? So I would probably argue that that's where we're seeing a disconnect, but that's also probably where you would want to and expect to see a disconnect. Like, we can't get rid of education policy and we probably shouldn't get rid of climate policy. So it's important that that sort of carries on despite it. I think what will happen in the budget will be quite interesting on this front as well. Like, this is a country that really, really cares about the economy right now. This is an unpopular government heading into a big economic moment. I don't see how they thread the needle on welfare, on taxes, and on just sort of like conveying stability and long-term planning. It's going to be very difficult. That's where I'd imagine there's a gap in approach, I suppose, maybe not priority.
Okay, thank you. Young person up there. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Maria. I just wanted to ask, basically, The Independent reports that more than half, 52% of Gen Z, those aged 13 and 27, think the UK would be better if a strong leader who does not have to bother with parliament and elections was in charge. Do you think this data accurately reflects the true opinions of youth today? And what has caused, and if so, what has caused many to think this way?
I've seen, and this has happened a few times, this particular question, and it's a phrasing of a question that comes from sort of historic investigations into authoritarianism and right-wing attitudes. I mean, my personal views on this are that the question is sometimes used to speak to a broader point, so they don't just say, this is how people think about the question, do you want a strong leader who doesn't have to do away with parliament? People interpret it as this is young people wanting anti-democratic solutions or wanting a dictatorship. I think that's a little bit more of an extreme interpretation of what that data is telling us. I think that data is telling us that young people are disaffected with the current political system, that young people don't see parliament as it stands doing a job. Why would you want a leader to pay attention to parliament right now if parliament isn't doing what you want it to? And I think reading into it more than that is risky. I would want to ask a lot more questions about what this strong leader is. Is that literally a dictator? How do we do away with parliamentary systems? To understand whether that is a real reflection of young people wanting a very authoritarian solution to things. So I think it reflects disaffection. I don't think it reflects a desire for dictatorship or authoritarianism from young people, unless all of you prove me wrong in the poll later today, which I don't think you will.
Seb, do you think this sort of fragmentation that we have now with, party support and party identification, and the rise of new parties, particularly Reform, is it being driven by the cost of living crisis, which seems out of control, rather than anything to do with race at all?
So I think you almost have to take a step back from even the cost of living crisis to understand what I think is underpinning this. And we call it anti-politics. You could use other words for this, but my view is that a lack of delivery, a lack of any meaningful change, a lack of a sense that things do change is reflected not just in my prices are getting higher, when's this going to stop? Immigration is out of control, when's that going to stop? Like, the government says they're going to take action on X, Y, Z. I don't see that action manifesting. Like, that's the problem here. There is a detachment between me voting for a party and something changing in my life. It is most acutely felt in cost of living crisis because everyone has to pay for things every day and feels that. Increasingly, it's felt in immigration as well. But I think that's the core thing that's driving this fragmentation. And I think one of the interesting things we have to remember is that when Labour won the election last year, they won it on the back of the same sentiment that's currently driving Reform to the top of the polls. People were tired of the Conservative government. They were tired of a system that didn't seem to work. They poured their hopes into a change narrative from Labour. That same exact narrative has flipped 180 and is now going against Keir Starmer and the party. So how you stop that narrative is the question. I'm just a pollster, not a strategist, fortunately.
That's a good observation. Person up there.
Hi. I'm Kate. I just wanted to ask, obviously you work with polls and that's quite an interesting intersection between facts, which is like obviously how many people are thinking what, and also opinions, which can be less logical. And I was just wondering, do you think that young people are more influenced by hard evidence or by, say, ideology or opinion that's given by politicians compared to an older generation or older voters?
It's a good question. And I think there's probably loads of academic research that covers this and probably has different answers. And my guess would be that there is some evidence. Well, what I can say for sure is that younger people tend not to have formed stuck opinions. You tend to crystallize your attitudes around 25 on a lot of things. And that's not just politics, that's also your movie taste and your music taste and that sort of thing. So there's an element of flexibility in how young people think about things. I don't think that means that there's a different driving force behind what young people are thinking. I would say that everyone across the board is influenced by the underlying ideological things and what some people would call irrational emotional sentiment on stuff. That's pervasive. I wouldn't say there's that many differences there. But definitely a sort of flexibility. I could see everyone in this room changing their vote a bit quicker than someone who's voted Conservative for 40 years, probably.
Great,
Seb Wride, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.